We're very lucky today to have with us Dave DeWalt, who's an old friend of mine and well known here in the Valley as the chairman of Mandiant, the chairman and CEO of FireEye, and the former CEO of McAfee. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's great. So we're just going to have a little conversation here about the topic of threats, the global threats and the evolution of global threats these days. And the premise of this is some of you may be familiar with a report that FireEye issued called World War C in September of 2013. Now, this is inspired by the best-selling book and Hollywood movie, World War Z, which was about zombies. And this is World War C about cyberspace. So the zombie book and movie, of course, you know, there's a global pandemic and politics and culture make a big difference in how the public and by extension governments reacted to the zombie plague. So in that, in one passage, for example, there's an Arab boy who refuses to believe that the disease is real because he suspects instead that Israel had fabricated the story. So we know that kind of thing doesn't happen. There's never misinformation or rumor or misattribution in cyberspace. But where Z stood for zombies, C stands for cyber. I have to caveat this to some extent, Dave, because as many of you know, I'm not a big fan of using the war word in cyberspace. We're talking about Cyber War C. And this is, World War C. So World War is nobody at the moment anyway, we don't think is actually being killed because of cyber incidents. And war is a big word. While it does sell newspapers and maybe reports, we should, I think, as humans, be a little bit more careful of how we use it. What's great about this report is that it provides detailed analysis based on anonymized FireEye customer data of the attack profiles of various nation-state attackers, including China, North Korea, India, Pakistan, Russia, Eastern Europe, Iran, Syria, Israel, and the United States. And it ends with some very interesting predictions, including a discussion of emerging actors in cyberspace, such as Brazil and Taiwan, and some recommendations, one of which talks about needing to build security by design. And you'll find a paper out there that a couple of Greg Austin and Sandro Gaken recently published and is out on the tables about trying to build in high security as security by design. So recommend that too. So, but rather than have me summarize the report, Dave and I agreed that I would ask him some underlying questions that come out of the analysis and let him talk about this a little bit. So, we're going to try to mix it up here with a little bit, and if we run out of steam, which is unusual for us, we will turn it over to you guys. So let me start. You mentioned up front the complexity of knowing who the true source of attack is. At the same time, well-instrumented global companies and global entities around the world who have networks everywhere can get a very solid idea of who is behind attacks. In other words, while attribution is elusive, you can often get pretty close to beyond a reasonable doubt. So how does this shift of better attribution affecting the way your clients are reacting to these attacks? Are they ready for somebody to push back against these intruders, or would they prefer to take their lumps and not stir up trouble either with their customers or regulators?
Well, it's been really interesting to see the maturation and understanding of who the adversaries actually are. You know this as well as I do, Bruce. The last 6 years or so, we as a community have begun to understand more and more about the types of attacks that we're seeing, a lot more unveiling of who the adversaries are, a lot better understanding of the types of attacks and the information that they're after. And we've been able to, in the last 12 months or so, put together a much better profile of a variety of organizations, 20 or so organizations around the world that have really created a very serious and very complex set of offensive tactics. And most of you have probably seen the initial report from Mandiant, the APT-1 report. FireEye's now put out this World War C report. But when you sort of look at the underlying characteristics of it, you know, all this wonderful innovation that we have, that we love, has created a almost perfect platform for the adversaries. That's just the sort of dark side of what we're seeing. You know, think about all our smartphones and all the cloud-based computing that we're dealing with. You know, SaaS architectures. You know, big data that we have. You know, think about all the wonderful things that are coming out of that. But it's created a really unique environment for the adversaries to leverage that technology to create their offensive skills. So more and more we've seen companies around the world. I just came back from an 8-day trip in the Middle East. I was in Saudi and in Qatar and in the Emirates. I mean, the understanding in pockets and regions around the world is elevating dramatically. And of course, the main question that they all have is, you know, who is this adversary? I want proof of who the adversary is. I want an active defense kind of model back. And of course, this is elevating things very dangerously. And of course, now we're seeing a lot of government activities. The report was interesting from my perspective because going back to my McAfee days, we had a couple groups and a number of small incidences that we had uncovered. And then ultimately now we're seeing, you know, 94% of all countries in the globe active in some way or another, either hosting servers, laundering intellectual property of some variety. The report shows 184 countries specifically involved in command and control server type activities. It really shows the internet and sort of this platform of innovation that's been created that offers, you know, almost every country in the world to be active in this type of system that we now have. And of course, it's creating a pretty dangerous environment for them. But coming to your last comment, you know, companies are very interested, I think, especially in industries that have had large breaches, large espionage types of activities that's elevated to board and audit committee type levels, to really create a much stronger, you know, sort of response to what they've seen. And so, you know, it's an interesting times we live in as we enter in a new era here for the understanding of these problems.
So really a sense of that although from the security professional standpoint, many would say, well, we're kind of getting the problem under control. Another piece of this dynamic is there's an escalation that's happening that you're seeing, and companies are getting tired of it and thinking about ways of pushing back, which will just elevate the level of danger.
Well, think about history. I mean, you all study this. You know, we've watched a lot of government activities for centuries, right? It's been part of society for a long period of time. Now you're seeing a transformation to government on commercial activities that's really been much more active, not just in defense and military, you know, commercial activities around the government, but now into every industry. The reports that we show, thousands of companies around the world with nearly every country as a victim and an attacker, is widespread. No small company, no large company. This is a very large, challenging problem to solve. So when you look at that and you look at the amount of funding coming into this, it's a challenging scenario for everyone to deal with.
Well, you know, you're kind of getting into the intellectual property theft piece because that does seem to be the most broad and high impact class of attacks, whether it's done by nation states or just by other industrial competitors. And I'm sure there's a fair amount of that, although you don't focus on that as much in the report. But most firms that I've talked to seem to be betting that they can stay ahead of the IP thieves by out-innovating them. In other words, you know, they're going to just continue to invent things faster, and that seems to be, to me, an expensive and dangerous bet to try to keep out ahead of people who are stealing your R&D results. So are companies leveling with you about how much pain they're feeling in terms of economic impact from these thefts, this high-end cybercrime, and how are they coping with it? What are you hearing?
I tend to think of it as there's kind of three types of companies, at least in my mind, as I talk to corporations around the world. You sort of have the first camp. I call it they're breached and they know it, and they're sort of pissed. And they're angry about the breach that they had. It's elevated dramatically. They've created emergency spending to solve that problem. They've involved governments. They've involved all types of defense capabilities to solve the problem. You sort of got this other one. They're breached. They care, but they don't know what to do about it. And they're in the sort of middle category of just, now what? And they'd rather have an architecture where maybe we spend a little bit more, hopefully it goes away. And of course, when it comes to IP, maybe they're in the camp of, keep outperforming the intellectual property, hopefully it goes away. And then you get that third camp where it's just almost complete ignorance. And unfortunately, that's the scenario. You walk into customer after customer and they're completely breached, almost completely owned in every way. They're losing their intellectual property and in major amounts, and they frankly just hardly care. And the custodians of those organizations just don't seem to care too much about it. And you see pockets around the world where the different levels of education are there. So you look at this intellectual property problem, it's a big one. I mean, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars a year. You're talking major leveling of emerging nations if they can gain economic advantage from the intellectual property that's stolen. And it's an interesting time, again, as I say, because the internet and these advanced persistent threats that create easy data exfiltration opportunities as ways to feed economic interest of their own country is powerful. And so it creates a mechanism that people should care a lot more about it as their competition changes around the world.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. There are examples. I mean, there are publicized examples of things that have been built that look just like something that somebody else designed, and it's not just taking it and reverse engineering it by buying one. Some of these things are defense platforms that you can't buy, and so there is evidence that this is happening. But I agree with you. It's not hitting the front office in a way that's causing a change in behavior. Or maybe it is. Maybe people are investing more in some cases.
I mean, we're seeing a rise in security spending clearly around the world, but we're still talking single-digit growth in an overall environment. I mean, what's amazing here, being in Silicon Valley, this is one of the most interesting intellectual property areas of the world. And we see, at least with my companies, that almost every Series A venture capital announced company, they almost immediately have an APT infection. And so you could draw a straight correlation to the press release and the fundraising exercise to the attackers coming after that intellectual property. It's just amazing. It's just a fact. If you look around the world with the greatest innovation countries, you see the greatest amount of attacks. Germany, Japan, the United States, you just see that kind of behavior occurring. So the more innovation that country has or those industries have, the more traction they're getting. Yeah. And of course, the awareness is different, per country. But here in Silicon Valley particularly, it's rising quite a bit. You're seeing a lot of that because you are seeing emulations of products very quickly. And of course, that's losing their competitive advantage within weeks and months of their idea. And of course, with our patent laws and our litigation situation here, it's very difficult to defend your IP, and it creates opportunities to steal it.
So towards the end of the report, you talk about some of the things that could change the landscape in the months ahead, including if there were a serious attack on critical infrastructure and the entrance of some of these new actors who are not currently as sophisticated as some of the ones that are currently playing. One of the things you mentioned, kind of in a group of things, and we just spent quite a bit of time this morning talking about this PRISM, freedom of speech, privacy, these kind of societal pressures and revelations of things that are going on, is increasing pressure for something that Dirk Brengelman, the German cyber ambassador, called technology sovereignty, where countries are thinking about maybe we just need to control all the technology inside our country, or all the technology that affects our country. And so the concern there is, one of the concerns in that is this kind of fragmentation of the internet. What do you see as such fragmentation effect having on the health of the internet and global commerce?
Oh, it's catastrophic. I mean, balkanization effect of the internet loses the effectiveness of our opportunity here for a global society that can advance. And we have such an amazingly powerful new domain that creates just an incredible amount of economic opportunity for just about anyone in the world. I mean, I heard you say a little bit earlier, you know, we need a nice playground to work within. We need to keep it down to a dull roar, as you said, and you know that's really important because we have this tremendous commerce platform. The amount of interdependencies of companies that we see and walk into, and you had quite a few of them on the panel. I mean, we're so interlocked around the world that it would be tremendously dangerous to regionalize any of those components. And that nationalism is probably the most dangerous thing we have to this technology advance that we're seeing. Now, having said that, if we don't create a better governance model for it, you know, we're headed for a potential disaster, and that is key. You know, a couple things that, you know, I've tracked over my career. I mean, just think about the amount of malware we see every day. You know, tens of thousands of pieces, 60,000 pieces, I think is the average a day of new malware that's created. 1 to 2 million new websites created every day that are designed for malicious activity alone. And because we have no governance model, and I can basically create tens of thousands of websites for $5 a website without any background check of who I am, who bought the website, I'm basically one click away from a malicious website. And of course, all I have to do as a bad guy is lure you to click on that website, and I start an advanced attack procedure. So if we don't create some more cooperation of how to govern the internet, create some better mechanism to, you know, keep all this malicious activity off of the web globally, you know, we're ending up with, you know, a lot of underground offensive activities that could really create a big problem. And you know, one of the things that I worry most is, you know, we have a lot of motivation on the internet to potentially steal or disrupt or to essentially create some espionage activity. But what you worry about most from my vantage point is potentially an accident happening. The amount of malware that's created, the amount of activity we're seeing, you know, into the BIOS and into the operating system layers, into the network layers of some of the most critical infrastructure like SCADA systems and other types of transportation industry infrastructure. One mistake, even by an attacker who's there just to look for information, could create a catastrophe. So it may not be the motivation of disrupting, it could be an accident that disrupts it as well, equal of proportions that are dangerous for all of us. So how to create better safety, how to keep the balance between privacy and security, critical, you know, conversations I'm sure that have been happening here. But at the same time, if we don't keep moving the ball forward to solve this problem, you know, we're heading in a dark place.
So on that point, I think you know, there's definitely a feeling in the conference among a lot of people. There's been several workshops and breakthrough groups on this topic of governance, and certainly that's something we're EastWest is looking into becoming more active in next year. And I think one of the challenges here is that you know, the current system of governments is of course based on the nation states, who turn out to be in some cases anyway part of the problem, as you point out in your report, not just from the standpoint of creating or escalating the security climate in a bad way, but also from the standpoint of not being very agile and being able to move as fast as the kinds of changes that we're talking about up here, which is a very rapidly evolving environment. So is there any way, you know, what's the alternative? How can, for example, we get other parts of the ecosystem, you know, firms and civil society involved in conversations that will actually try to get you know, action to happen faster? Because I think at least there's some here who believe that we can't just wait for government to do this.
Right. Well, I think it's really important. I'll start out with echoing what you're saying. I mean, there's a couple amazing examples. You're seeing so much offensive investment happening in nation states around the world, and the collateral damage to that is pretty obvious, hopefully, at least from my perspective. What's happened is capitalism has creeped into this nation state model as well. So what happens is a lot of the offensive actors at night are working on contracting, moonlighting, perhaps selling their offensive knowledge to someone on the internet that could be able to buy it for $1, or, you know, not just $1, but for some sum of money. So what we're watching is an offensive attack kit that might be a 0-day that has a very large offensive opportunity is able to easily be acquired by some nation state or terrorist group or religiously or politically motivated group somewhere else in the world for basically fractions of the dollar, versus creating a plutonium enrichment type of scenario or some sort of advanced weaponry. So you look at the capitalism involved, the moonlighting involved, and you look at the safety required for this, and we need to create a better mechanism to control that. And particularly the selling of the arms, the ability to distribute these weapons. These are weapons that potentially can be weapons of mass destruction as well. And it's important from a cyber domain that we create the proper controls for that, in my opinion, because we continue to watch one nation state's actor build the product and sell it to another nation state actor that doesn't look like they have any connectivity whatsoever. And it's all about money in between. So it's a critical time for us to create a better environment for that. And I think it's going to create a combination of governments working better together, commercial companies working better together, and of course, it's kind of teamwork all around that needs to happen here to solve this.
So I think that's right. I mean, we say that a lot. There's a lot of talk about public-private partnership and teamwork and everything. One of the things that's different about this problem than other problems of global nature is that the infrastructure really is owned by the private sector. It's not national infrastructure. It's global infrastructure owned by global companies. And so it seems to me that we're looking for different models than we have in this, and figuring out ways of because there, even in the intergovernmental structures, international structures, where there are firms who are participating in the conversations, they have a voice but not really decision-making power. And so I think collectively we're all pretty uncomfortable at the moment with the idea that firms would have decision-making power on some of these global policy issues. But what I'm sensing, and I wonder, you talk to a lot of CEOs, that firms are starting to realize that in this area and some other areas, somebody has to do something, and because time is short to solve some of these problems. Are you getting a sense of that? And is there any talk about what could be done in terms of companies getting together to work on some of these things?
It's very interesting. If you go around the world, different regions have a much different view on this. Mm-hmm. Just coming from the Middle East, you're watching a much different model where the government's influence on some of their critical infrastructure is, let's just say, much higher. And the ability to raise the standards of security, both offensive and defensive preparedness, with their critical infrastructure is much greater than it is here in America, let's just say, where the privatization of a lot of that critical infrastructure is there. So some parts of the world, as they're becoming more educated, their advancement with their security postures are elevating dramatically. And other parts of the world, namely the United States in some cases, where the greatest advantage of technology is becoming the greatest disadvantage of the cyber hacking world, is falling behind in that way. So each region is a little different when it comes to that, for sure. But I heard Phil say, and others, some of the ISACs and some of the regional industry groups, those communities are very powerful from a private. They're sharing a lot more. They're elevating their industrial defense architectures by sharing, and of course that's helping a lot. But again, in my opinion, we need a lot more.
So let me turn it over to all of you. What question haven't I asked that we should be asking? How about Roger here? Okay, we'll get a mic over here momentarily.
First, congratulations on a very stimulating report. Particularly the life cycle of the exploits and the
Wait, we got the microphone coming. But first, there was a compliment on the stimulating. Okay.
Can you please repeat that?
Yeah.
So in the report, you say that after corporations or companies, civil society organizations such as human rights organizations are prime targets. I'm wondering if you could speak more about that, and is there particular countries that are going after those targets rather than others?
Yeah, when you look at the analysis, there's 4 or 5 major motivations that the attackers have, and without completely creating attribution to each one, you obviously have an espionage sort of intellectual property sort of angle that many attackers are focused on. Clearly, there's been a lot of written already about that. That's one huge vector. You have a very heavy crime vector that's still very, very vibrant, and that's changed dramatically as well. The crime isn't your, what I would call your high volume, low credit card kinds of activities anymore. It's actually moved to the equity and capital markets quite a bit. Insider information, spear phishing, financial controllers, insiders who have knowledge of their public information or about to be public information is critical to the crime group, so they could hedge the capital markets, make money, launder that through their various chains. Much bigger money-making opportunities for the criminal groups, much more difficult to track. So when we see a lot of the infections occurring in companies, they're targeted right at insider information, whether it's famous breaches like the NASDAQ deal desk or some of the news wires that are releasing the information. That's all about get information, trade off the information, make money off the information. And then you have a lot of the political motivated types of attacks that we're seeing. One nation trying to gain a political advantage on another nation, think tank organizations heavily breached, foreign affairs type councils heavily breached. All that is for political motivations, and obviously, not to steal anything necessarily for money or for sabotage, but obviously for political gain. And then the last one, which is what we see is probably the most dangerous, is the sabotage, destruction elements. And just to give you a quick story, not to bore you on that, but I don't know how many of you watched the South Korean attack this past year. I thought it was really interesting, at least from my perspective. On March 20th of this year, 80 companies in South Korea were targeted. The target of the attack was 25 different malware families. This was a very complex orchestrated attack. Many of them were very advanced zero-day-like instrumentations that were used. And of course, the attack was to destroy the master boot records on every computer in every company that they had targeted. And a lot of worry of South Korea, let's just say, and belief that it was their northern neighbor, perpetrating that. And of course, when we did forensic post that, we realized that a lot of the malware came from other parts of the world that it was quickly purchased on. And of course, this was all about one motivation: complete destruction. So you get these types of examples that are showing up in society that are coming from the report that really show the moonlighting elements of the cyber conditions, the regional conflicts that are occurring with the cyber conditions, the nature of the motivation with these conditions, all new really in the last year or two of that magnitude. And so this creates a new era for us.
Great. Well, I think we're about out of time here, so I think we'll cut it off. And thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Dave, for this.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Steve.
All right. Good.